So, to begin with, the very first thing we need to master is actually reading the insert effectively, what I like to call intelligent reading. If we spend our time reading properly and looking and noticing particularly what we need to, we can do an awful lot of the work for the rest of the questions. Now, the first thing that's going to come up in paper 1 is the information that you're given about the extract. Now, it's all too easy to skip over this and not pay attention, but this kind of sets up a succession of important things that allow you to begin to read with intelligence. Now, an example I'm giving you here, you can see this is the information that we get. This is the opening section of Remarkable Creatures by Tracy Chevalier, an historical novel about a young woman who became acclaimed during the 19th century for her success in finding fossils on the Dorset coast. Now, there's nothing given to you there that isn't important. Otherwise, they wouldn't have put it there. So it's vital we notice it. So what should we notice? Well, the first thing is, it tells us this is the opening section. So we should read it with the idea in our heads that this is an opening. These are the first words of a novel. And that allows us to make decisions about some of the choices that she's made and the effect of the choices. We'll get the first words, the first sentence, the first paragraph. We'll see what she wants us to know at the beginning and what doesn't. Now, the same will be true if you get a particular section from the middle of a novel, or if you get, as you can do, the end of a novel. It will tell you that quite clearly so that you can decide for yourself how that affects your reading of it. Now, the next thing it tells us here is that this is a historical novel, and it tells us it's set during the 19th century. Now, again, for us and our purposes here, that helps us to understand that this is somebody writing about the past. It's a modern writer writing back in the past. Therefore, they're going to write with some hindsight as to what that time might have been like, and they've chosen that reason for a particular. They've chosen that setting for a particular reason. Often, it will tell you the genre, and that genre will help you to understand what to expect again. Now, finally, what we get here is details about the story they want us to know. So, it tells us it's about a young woman. That maybe suggests and helps us understand that gender may be an issue, particularly in the 19th century, who became acclaimed, and it was during the 19th century she did, for her success in finding fossils on the Dorset coast. Right, so we know that's what's coming up. It's going to be a woman who finds fossils on Dorset coast and becomes famous for it. So before we even begin reading, we've got quite a bit of information that allows us to focus on what we're being. So now the extract. Well, the first thing it tells us is this is chapter 1, and in this case, chapter 1 has a title, Different from All the Rocks on the Beach. Now again, if we're reading intelligently, we don't just see that and skip past it. We think of it. We think, why has the writer chosen that as a title? Well, we know it's about fossils. So, finding fossils, she's likely to be on the beach. I'd assume that the fossils are what are different from all the other rocks on the beach. So maybe in chapter 1, she's going to start finding these things. But then we should always think that there may be a symbolic or metaphorical meaning for this. Is this about her? Is she going to be different from all the rocks on the beach? Is she going to stand out from the norm? Well, we know from the introduction that she becomes acclaimed for this. So maybe that's something we should be looking for, the idea of somebody who sticks out and who's different. Now, I mentioned before that the first words are always important of any extract, but particularly if it's the opening, because writers choose their first words very carefully. Now here we have the first two sentences. Lightning has struck me all my life. Just once it was real. Lightning has struck me all my life. Well, obviously that can't be literal. She can't have just been constantly struck by lightning. So we can see it's immediately metaphorical. And we know what the idea of being struck by lightning is metaphorically. Bad things happening to you, or dramatic things happening to you. So that tells us something straight away. But then what she does, as you can see, she's transferring it to the idea that once she was actually struck by lightning. So again, that's what I'm understanding as I'm going. Now, as we carry on then, again, I shouldn't remember it, for I was little more than a baby, but I do remember. As I'm reading that, okay, I'm getting the meaning, I'm visualizing this idea. She's a baby being struck by lightning, or little more than a baby being struck by lightning. But what I notice already is the repetition of the word remember. So this is very much about memory, and of course the idea here that we don't really remember stuff when we're a baby, but for some strange reason she does. So there's a feeling to me already from these first few lines as I'm reading that there is something mysterious and strange and maybe even otherworldly about this. Now she begins to tell us about the event itself, about getting struck by lightning. I was in a field where there were horses and riders performing tricks. Then a storm blew in, and a woman, not ma'am, picked me up and brought me under a tree. As she held me tight, I looked up and saw the pattern of black leaves against a white sky. Now, again, I don't just read that through and hope I understand it. I'm trying to visualize this. So I'm seeing the field, I'm seeing the horses and riders performing tricks, and then I'm imagining the storm coming in. It's almost like a film to me, and the woman taking her under that tree. And then it shifts to her, very much her perspective, even more, and the idea that she was held by this woman who wasn't her mother, and looking up and seeing the pattern of black leaves against a white sky as the storm comes. Now, details I've noticed, of course, as well. It wasn't her mum, ma'am as she calls her there. I'm already thinking to myself, why is it significant there were horses and riders performing tricks? I'm keeping that in my mind. I don't know yet. Then there was a noise, like all the trees falling down round me, and a bright, bright light, which was like looking at the sun. A buzz ran right through me. It was as if I'd touched a hot coal and I could smell singed flesh and sense there was pain, yet it weren't painful. I felt like a stocking turned inside out. Now, obviously that is describing what it was like. The thing I notice is it's very, very immediate and in the moment, and is very central. We get the noise, we get the sound, we get the sight, we get the smell. We get everything thrown at us here. But we also get something else, as well as all of the imagery that we're noticing there. It's this idea, I could sense there was pain, yet it weren't painful. Now, that's obviously of importance here. Why wasn't it painful to her, even though she'd been struck by lightning? Again, is this part of the slight strangeness of the event? And the use of that weren't painful. I'm noticing, like ma'am earlier, that this is now somebody who is speaking in their own voice, and that could well be something that can help me, using their own grammar. Others began pulling at me and calling, but I couldn't make a sound. I was carried somewhere, then there was warmth all round, not a blanket, but wet. It was water, and I knew water. Our house was close to the sea. I could see it from our windows. Then I open my eyes, and it feels like they haven't been shut since. So, the end of the story of what happens here seems very much, again, sensual. She doesn't seem to know what's happening around her, but she just feels it. A warmth of water around her. I knew what that was. And then the idea of opening her eyes. And this strange thing at the end, it feels like they haven't been shut since. Now, why is that there? Well, carry on reading. The lightning killed the woman holding me and two girls standing next to her, but I survived. So that's nice and factual. So everybody around her apart from her. So again, that idea I'm picking up of this being something special. I remember she was different from the other rocks on the beach. Maybe it does apply to her. They say I was a quiet, sickly child before the storm, but after it I grew up lively and alert. So there are, we've been given a dividing moment in her life here. I cannot say if they're right, but the memory of that lighting still runs through me like a shiver. There's meant to be lightning there. It marks powerful moments of my life. Seeing the first crocodile skull Joe found and finding its body myself. Discovering my other monsters on the beach. Meeting Colonel Birch. Other times I'll feel the lightning strike and wonder why it's come. Sometimes I don't understand, but I accept what the lightning tells me. For the lightning is me. It entered me when I was a baby and never left. So we get the idea of memory coming in again. Remember, we picked up remember at the beginning, so I'm now remembering that very clearly myself. The idea that the memory runs through me like a shiver while the lightning's there. And then we start to get this strange thing about it. It's not just that moment. She links it to powerful moments of her life, which suggests always to me that the lightning itself is powerful. And we get these details. Who's Joe? We don't know. Brother? Quite likely. Finding a crocodile skull and finding its body myself. Discovering my other monsters on the beach. So she's linking this, by the looks of things, those other monsters surely are her fossils. And then meeting Colonel Birch. Who's Colonel Birch? Well, clearly she doesn't want to tell us at this point. We're just left with the name for when it comes later. So the lightning is linked to the discovery of the fossils, and she makes clear why. She feels it inside her. For her, she says, the lightning is me. It entered me when I was a baby and never left. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, this explains this otherworldly thing. She's obviously interpreting this, that she didn't die from the lightning. What happened was it went into her and it strikes at points in her life and helps her. So that's meant that I've got a full understanding of this to this point. And then when I get to the paragraph, I feel an echo of the lightning each time I find a fossil, a little jolt that says, yes, Mary Anning, you are different from all the rocks on the beach. I get confirmation of what I suspected at the beginning, that she was different from all the rocks on the beach in the same way as the fossils are. So she's feeling a connection with that. That is why I'm a hunter, to feel that bolt of lightning and that difference every day. So what I'm left with at the end of that passage is some key things before I come to any questions. First of all, I know this is the opening. All those things we've been told are going to lead to things to come later. And it's clearly setting up for me the background, the idea that she is different and exceptional. The idea that it's a historical novel from the 19th century, which kind of goes with the way of writing, the way her grammar's represented in places. But also, again, something to do maybe with her gender and our expectations of her position. It's in the first person, which doesn't just mean something bland like, that means we can understand it more. It means that the perspective is hers. This female in the 19th century is showing us what she felt rather than some kind of objective reality. We've seen right from the beginning there's this metaphor of lightning which transforms into becoming something almost symbolic for her, of almost inspiration striking her at key moments. The story, as we've seen so far, that she told had a focus on the feelings from her perspective. So when she was hit by lightning, she wanted us to feel from her perspective. Okay? The consequences that comes afterwards, the lightning in me, for example, is important. And of course then how that leads on to the fossils. So what I'm trying to get across here is that by taking our time and reading intelligently, and even with all of this discussion as it's going along. It's still less than the 15 minutes they gave. By reading intelligently the extract, I can get a sense of the piece of writing. I can get a sense of the language, of the structure, of everything as it goes along. I can see that the structure builds from the introduction of lightning through the story, through the consequences to the fossils. I can see that there's a lot of imagery and sensual language used to get across how that lightning has affected her and how it felt at the time. So I'm in control of this, and it can allow me to make much clearer statements on what is going on.